Hey guys, tonight, we wake up on the hard-packed dirt floor of a thatched hovel in a tiny English village. It's just past cockcrow, and your blanket, if you're lucky enough to have one, is a stiff wool rectangle that smells faintly of mildew and goat. You blink into the low gray light that leaks through the wattle and daub walls, trying to decide whether it's dawn or just the moon being rude again. Either way, you're awake, and the mud is cold. There's no mattress, no pillow, and no privacy, just your entire family. 2 chickens, and maybe a sleepy pig sharing one small room. You sit up, bump your head on a smoke-blackened rafter, and reach for your morning turnip. It's not a metaphor. It's just the only thing in season. You gnaw it like an apple, trying not to chip a tooth on the part that's frozen. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always cozy seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge outside barefoot because shoes are for Sundays, and nobles, and people with money. Your toes squish into wet straw, and sheep droppings the village path already churned into a brown slurry from a week of winter rain. No one remembers when it started. It might be the same rain from last spring, just doing a victory lap. The only sounds are a distant cow moaning and the soft glug-glug of your neighbor emptying her chamber pot. Into the street. Again. Historians still argue whether most medieval peasants lived in communal filth, or whether that image has been unfairly exaggerated by later writers with a grudge against mud. But here in your sleepy little village, it's not exactly Versailles. Your hut, called a cruck house, is made of timber slats and daub mud straw hair and whatever else the pigs weren't using. It leans slightly to one side, like it's unsure whether to stand or collapse in protest. And the roof. Thatched, of course, because it's affordable insulating and attracts all sorts of delightful creatures, mice birds, insects, and occasionally a curious fox that likes to walk across the ceiling at night. You wander to the village well to draw water, though it tastes a bit cabbagey since the miller started dumping his wash upstream. Bathing isn't on the morning agenda. That's more of a once-a-fortnight type event, or maybe a twice-a-year one depending on your theological leanings. But you do splash your face with cold water, shiver dramatically, and wipe your hands on your already dirty tunic. Breakfast is humble turnip porridge, a bit of yesterday's barley bread, and if you're incredibly lucky, a boiled egg from the one hen who hasn't stopped laying out of sheer existential despair. You eat standing up because the fire is too smoky to sit near. There's a corner seat, but it's claimed by your uncle who's been recovering from a sore ankle for 7 years. Work begins with the church bell. Not an alarm clock, just a big brass gilt gong rung by the village priest who probably has gout but insists on climbing the tower anyway. You head out to the fields with your father and brother's sleeves already wet from the dew. The land belongs to Lord Nibblybottom or someone equally noble-sounding, and you farm it in exchange for protection, which mostly means you get to stay poor in slightly more organized fashion. The soil is heavy with clay, and you use a wooden plow pulled by an ox who hates mornings even more than you do. The plow squeals, the ox farts defiantly, and your back starts aching somewhere around row 3. No tractors, no gloves, and definitely no PTO. You pause to sneeze and wonder if it's just a chill or the start of something worse, maybe ague or the dreaded humors imbalance. Either way, your options are keep working or get exercised. By mid-morning, you're allowed a break just long enough to drink a weak ale and chew on whatever your mother wrapped in yesterday's linen. There's no sugar, no citrus, and definitely no coffee. If you're feeling rebellious, you might nibble on a candied fennel seed and immediately regret the extravagance. Meanwhile, gossip floats through the village like wood smoke. Old Marjorie says the reeve is cheating at grain measurements again. Young Thomas swears he saw a fairy behind the tannery. He might have just been drunk. And your neighbor's son Jeffrey keeps practicing his lute by the fire pit, even though he only knows 2 chord and both of them sound like regret. By early afternoon, the sun peeks through the clouds just long enough to remind you how itchy wool can be. You're sweating under layers of rough-spun tunic and hose, wondering if you should just invent shorts and be done with it. You won't. That would be heresy. Probably. You wrap up the day with more digging, a brief encounter with a stinging nettle, and a thrilling moment where you find an old coin buried in the furrows, then realize it's just a flattened button. You pocket it anyway. Treasure is treasure. Evening brings you back to the hut where the fire is low and the turnip stew is somehow colder than it was when you left. Your family gathers around the hearth to pray, argue, or listen to your aunt recount the time she saw a ghost in the woods wearing a bishop's hat. The baby cries. The wind whistles through the cracks in the walls, and the pig farts luxuriously in its sleep. You crawl back into bed, itchy, damp, and full of vague dread about the next day. But you made it, mostly, for now. You wake up the next morning and surprisingly you're still alive. Well done. Time to test your luck again, this time with bread. Yes, bread, that warm, familiar, allegedly harmless staple that in medieval England could absolutely kill you. You see, bread isn't just food, it's politics, punishment, and sometimes mild psychedelic horror. Most days, your household makes something called maslin, an uneven blend of wheat and rye flour, sometimes mixed with beans, peas, or whatever didn't blow away in the last windstorm. The texture, somewhere between chewy and regret. The taste, that depends entirely on the miller, the weather, and whether the grain was stored next to a damp goat. Now, if you're lucky or unlucky, depending how you look at it, the rye has been sitting around just long enough to grow a little mold. That mold is Claviceps purpura, better known today as ergot. It's not cute, it's not tasty, and it produces a lovely chemical cocktail that when baked into bread can cause everything from nausea to seizures to vivid hallucinations involving flaming saints or talking cows. Historians still argue whether entire villages really danced themselves into oblivion because of ergot poisoning. But enough people writhed, screamed, or thought their limbs were on fire. That bad bread became a reasonable excuse for just about anything. So yes, you eat the bread, and yes, your fingers tingle a little. You blink. Did the ox just wink at you? Probably not. But maybe. To prevent such culinary surprises, England implemented one of its earliest consumer protection laws, the assize of bread and ale. It dictated exactly how much a loaf should weigh for a given price, and if a baker shortchanged you, justice came swiftly and publicly. The offending loaf was weighed against an official lead standard, and if found lacking, the baker might be fined, put in the pillory, or delightfully forced to parade through town with his subpar bread tied around his neck. This is called justice, and it is served lukewarm and slightly stale. But most villagers don't bake at home. They take their dough to the communal bakehouse, often run by the local lord or church, and pay a fee to have it properly cooked. The oven's massive, shared, and has probably seen more drama than any local court. Arguments erupt over scorched bottoms, fights break out over crust thickness. One time, someone claimed their loaf had a saint's face in it. That got weird. The baker, for his part, is a mysterious and slightly feared figure. He knows heat, he knows yeast. And he knows your secrets because he hears everything while poking loaves with a long paddle at 3 a.m. He wears a flour-stained tunic and smells like burnt oat, and while he might be missing a few teeth, he's got power. In fact, if he makes the king's bread or the church's communion wafers, he's practically untouchable, a flowery deity. But even the baker has his limits. During shortages, when grain is scarce and the windmill's frozen over, bread becomes a currency of its own. The miller raises prices. The baker adds chalk or ground beans to stretch the dough. The villagers grumble. And if things get truly desperate, they turn to bark bread. Yes, actual bark, scraped from trees and ground into something vaguely edible. You try it once, never again. It tastes like moss and regret. Meanwhile, wealthier folks enjoy manchet, a refined white bread made from sifted wheat flour. It's pillowy warm and reserved for those who don't sweat for a living. You see it once at the manor house, resting smugly beside a silver spoon. You stare. It winks. Probably a hallucination. You look away. Back in your world, bread serves another role ritual. At weddings, the couple shares a loaf. At funerals, mourners receive soul bread handed out as both comfort and subtle reminder that death is hungry too. On feast days, the priest blesses loaves in Latin while the children sneak pieces under their cloaks. And during Lent, you're told to eat dry bread and reflect on suffering, which you find slightly redundant. There's also the small matter of bread-related superstition. Drop a loaf butter side down, and someone in the family will die. Cut into a warm one before it cools, and your crops will fail. Feed crusts to a dog, and you risk attracting witches. These rules vary by region, but everyone agrees never ever waste bread, even if it's green, even if it whispers. You once knew a man named Ulrich who claimed to make singing bread. He'd bake loaves shaped like birds and swore they chirped in the morning. Turned out he'd hidden a toad under the baking stone. The toad was fine. Ulrich was not. He was asked politely to move to another village. Some evenings you help your mother score the top of the dough before baking simple crosses or hash marks, mostly to let steam escape. But she says it's also to let the devil out. You ask if the devil is in the bread. She squints at you. He's everywhere, love, she says. You don't ask again. By now, your stomach's rumbling again. You reach for another slice of the rye loaf cooling by the hearth. It's warm, dense, and smells like sour beer. You chew slowly, watching the fire crackle and listening to the wind creak through the thatch. For a moment, the world is soft, cozy even. Then the floor tilts. Just a little. You blink, probably nothing. You come to your senses slumped over a pile of firewood, the bread-induced swaying of the earth finally giving way to normal, slightly lopsided peasant life. There's no time to dwell on whether your rye loaf tried to possess you, because today you begin training for glory, or at least for knighthood. Sort of. Eventually, maybe. For now, you're just a very muddy page. At age 7, your noble parents, or the slightly less noble ones pretending they're noble, send you off to another lord's household to learn the essential arts of courtly life, how to serve wine, fold linens, polish boots, and bow without knocking over expensive things. Historians still argue whether pages actually received formal education or mostly served as mobile furniture, but either way, you're here now. And your job starts with carrying a chamber pot larger than your head down 3 flights of uneven stairs. You are, to put it gently, not a knight yet. Your day begins before sunrise in a drafty stone hall that smells like old meat and wax. You sleep on a straw pallet tucked between a damp tapestry and another page named Godwin, who snores like a boiling kettle. The first task: retrieve the knight's greaves from the armory and shine them using a combination of sand, vinegar, and spit. Mostly spit. There's a bucket for polishing and another for puking, and after your first attempt you accidentally confuse the two. You're expected to run errands without tripping fetch books without reading them, and always remember who outranks whom, especially during meals. Seating is its own arcane art, and you once nearly sat in a spot reserved for the seneschal. He glared. You apologized by dropping a meat pie directly into your own lap. It was the correct move. Once you're older, say around 14, you graduate to squire. This is the glamorous part, the noble training, the tales told in poems. Except in reality, it's 40% horse dung removal, 30% awkwardly fastening armor in the rain, and 30% wondering if you're legally allowed to punch a goose who stole your gauntlet. You carry your knight's gear. Mail hauberk weighs more than your cousin helmet, smells like boiled onions. Sword-heavy dagger, also heavy, and wooden training shield that appears to be made entirely of splinters. During mock combat practice, you learn the fine balance between strike with force and don't knock out the baron's nephew. One poor squire named Hugh does the latter and spends the next 2 weeks eating his meals standing up as punishment. Not ideal. Historians believe the chivalric code was a blend of Christian virtue, battlefield etiquette, and elaborate dinner manners, though in your experience it mostly boils down to don't stab anyone important by accident. You train with blunted weapons in the courtyard, slashing at straw dummies while imagining they're people who have wronged you, such as the cook who banned you from honey pastries. Occasionally you receive lectures from the knight himself, a burly man with a nose like a turnip and a voice that vibrates your bones. He teaches you about honor, loyalty, and the proper angle for riding a horse without splitting your trousers. He once dislocated his own shoulder trying to mount a destrier in full armor, and you still think about it whenever someone says, graceful. Speaking of armor, you spend many hours helping your knight into it. This process involves leather straps, buckles, cursed laces, and about 8 fingers worth of pinched skin. The chainmail alone weighs 30 pounds and absorbs rain like a towel. It rusts if you look at it wrong. The worst part is the codpiece, which no one wants to touch, but everyone is expected to adjust. You do so delicately, with tongs. The castle itself is cold, drafty, and full of unpleasant surprises, hidden stairwells, mystery puddles, and one room where the ceiling just gave up entirely. You scrub the floors with sand in your sleeves. You chase mice. You polish so many candlesticks you start dreaming of wax. And at the end of the day, when your knight returns smelling of sweat and horse breath, you pretend not to notice when he burps directly into your face while telling you to draw his bath. The bath is a barrel. The water is borrowed from the livestock trough. Still, there are moments of splendor. Feast nights bring warmth, laughter, and mildly terrifying juggling monks. You eat roasted meat with greasy fingers, listen to minstrels sing about things they've clearly never seen, and occasionally sneak a sip of mead while pretending it's broth. You've even danced awkwardly with a visiting noble's daughter who giggled and said your shoes made you look like a duck. You took it as a compliment. But the training never ends. You rise early, you muck out stables, you practice jousting with a wooden lance that has already broken once and will absolutely break again. You learn to recite your knight's full genealogy, which includes 6 Williams, 3 Matildas, and 1 unfortunate Geoffrey who was trampled by a pig at a wedding. You're sore, you're bruised, your toes have not been dry since Easter, but you're improving. You can now saddle a horse in under 5 minutes, carry 3 helmets at once, and recite a psalm while dodging a thrown tankard. Your reward. A mildly enthusiastic nod from the knight and the right to polish his boots with slightly cleaner rags. One day, perhaps you'll be knighted. You'll stand proudly in the chapel, sword on shoulder, prayers echoing in Latin as the crowd watches. But for now, you're just a teenager in soggy hose, elbow deep in saddle soap, wondering whether knighthood is really worth the blisters. It is, you tell yourself, probably. You're older now, and theoretically wiser, though you still wake up wondering if bread should really be that green. But there's no time to dwell. Because today, you're not polishing armor or chasing dreams of knighthood. Today, you're farming. Again. Like most people. Like almost everyone in medieval England, regardless of whether they dream of glory sainthood or just slightly warmer socks. You pull on your woolen tunic, coarse, itchy, suspiciously damp, and head outside into the morning fog. There's a chicken already standing in your boot. You negotiate. It refuses. You take the other boot. The fields await. You're working a narrow strip of land called a vergate, which sounds majestic, but is really just a few acres of stubborn dirt assigned to your family by the Lord. It's part of the open field system, everyone's scattered strips tangled together like nature's crossword puzzle. Boundaries are imaginary, arguments are real, and God help you if you trample Geoffrey's barley. Again. Now the myth goes that medieval peasants never rested, that they toiled every day, dawn till dusk with no break, no pause, and no fun. But that's not entirely true. The church calendar in all its saintly generosity offered something like 150 feast days per year, because when work was forbidden and prayer was mandatory, ideally accompanied by food, drink, and extremely passive-aggressive hymns. Historians still debate just how restful these feast days actually were. Some say they were genuinely relaxed, no plowing, no hoeing, just church and mild gossip. Others argue they were loaded with mandatory rituals, long fasts, and helping the reeve organize a public mummers play involving 2 pigs and someone dressed as the Archangel Michael. You're not sure which version you prefer. Either way, on regular workdays, your schedule is brutally simple. You rise with the light. Chase pigs away from the cabbages, feed the cow last night's bean mash, and start hoeing. Hoeing is eternal. You hoe the same furrow your father hoed and his father before him, and probably a Roman centurion who got lost and decided to settle here. Your back aches, your knees complain, the sky teases rain, then commits to it halfway through lunch. Speaking of lunch, today's meal is a thick pottage barley, leaks a few weeds you swear are edible, and maybe a squirrel if the trap worked. It's served in a wooden bowl you share with your brother, who eats like he's in a competition no one else joined. For drink, small ale. Not because you're partying, but because the water might contain more parasites than soup. The ale is weak, cloudy, and blessedly safer than the well. You sip slowly, watching a crow glare at you from the fence like it owns the field. Tools are primitive wooden plows, iron-tipped hoes, sickles that have seen better centuries. Oxen provide most of the muscle, though yours seems to be nursing a grudge from yesterday and keeps trying to steer the cart into a bush. You sigh. You steer. You pat him gently and whisper threats. Then comes the reeve, the village's very own unpaid overachiever. He's the Lord's chosen enforcer appointed from among the peasants to collect dues, supervise fields, and make sure no one's stealing grain or hiding extra pigs under haystacks. The reeve is not popular. His tunic is always slightly too clean. His eyes are sharp. He once fined a widow for over-harvesting leeks, whatever that means. You try to look busy. You swing your hoe with extra zeal. You nod respectfully. The reeve sniffs and moves on, leaving a trail of suspicion and turnip dust in his wake. But farming isn't just planting and harvesting. There's mending fences, scaring birds, tending bees, mucking barns, gathering wood, and checking for signs of mildew rot, or worst of all, witchweed. Witchweed isn't real, but your aunt says it makes goats talk backwards, so everyone panics anyway. Then, of course, there's the weather. Glorious English weather. Sometimes it rains for a week. Sometimes it frosts in May. Once lightning struck your neighbor's thatch and everyone blamed the carpenter's daughter for reading too much. She now lives in a hut near the marsh and makes suspiciously accurate weather predictions. On good days, you sing as you work soft rhythmic chants passed down through generations. Something about barley love and a lad who fell in a ditch and married a mole. You don't question the lyrics. They rhyme. That's enough. On bad days, you watch your neighbor's field flourish while yours sulks like a damp sponge. You wonder if he's cursed you, or if your ox is sabotaging you out of spite. You consider confronting him. You don't. As harvest approaches, the village pulls together. Everyone cuts bundles and threshes in a frantic race against time and mold. Children help. Elders direct. One man gets kicked by a mule and blames the devil. Spirits are high. Ale is flowing. You're ankle-deep in grain, sneezing wildly, and for a moment you feel part of something ancient and enduring. Then, someone drops a scythe on your foot, and the magic evaporates. Evening comes. You return home sunburned, scratched and covered in mysterious green flecks. Supper is more pottage, maybe enriched with bits of eel if the stream was generous. You sit by the fire, socks steaming, listening to your mother hum a lullaby she says is older than the hills. It might be. It might also be about cheese. No one really knows. You rest your head against the wall and close your eyes. Another day down, only a few hundred more until winter. You don't mean to wake up before sunrise again, but someone sneezes violently in the next room and you're jolted upright. It's not your hut, you're visiting your cousin in the next village, which is exciting in theory, but less so when you realize you slept on a bench beside an elderly hound and a pickled eel. Still, today's plan is different. Today you'll confront the greatest hardship of medieval English life, the law. Not the kind with wigs and powdered speeches. No, you're about to experience law the way most villagers did, confusing, inconsistent, and alarmingly easy to violate. You pull on your hose duck out into the misty morning and immediately break the law. How you stepped onto the Lord's hunting path reserved for nobles and their dogs. Congratulations, that's a finable offense. If you'd sneezed while doing it during Lent, you might have been whipped for impiety. The lines between crime and coincidence are very thin here. Medieval England's legal system is a patchwork of feudal law, church law, and whatever the local lord felt like declaring on Tuesday. Historians still debate whether villagers genuinely understood most of the laws they were subject to, or whether they just learned by getting punished and working backward. Your first stop is the alewife shop. You want a morning sip of small beer, but she's whispering about a summons. Turns out she served ale in a short measure. Her wooden mug had warped, and now she might be brought before the manorial court. She could be fined, shamed, or forced to drink her own stale brew in public. Again. You nod politely and step away before the reeve sees you. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you probably have without knowing it. That's the thing. Nearly everything is technically illegal. Cutting firewood without permission. Illegal. Fishing in the wrong stream. Definitely illegal. Forgetting to tithe. Hellishly illegal. Today you're helping your cousin gather mushrooms for his grandmother's soup. Sounds innocent enough, except mushroom gathering is a legal minefield. Are you on common land or the Lord's preserve? Did you pick the good mushrooms or the sacred ones used only on St. Milburga's Day? Are you accidentally holding a death cap and now hallucinating the Virgin Mary in a hedgerow? Your cousin shrugs and picks whatever looks edible. You watch a squirrel judge you from a branch. Along the road, a town crier bellows news from a distant castle, something about a new sumptuary law. Apparently, only those earning over 20 marks a year may wear fur on their sleeves. You look at your cuffs. Wool. It's always wool. You're safe. For now. These laws designed to maintain social order dictate who may wear what, eat what, and live where. If you're a peasant, you're expected to look like a peasant. Anything fancier implies rebellion. Or worse, ambition. You reach the village green where the tithing men gather. They're in charge of keeping order, collecting minor fines, and overseeing the frank pledge system, a brilliant legal invention where groups of 10 households are held collectively responsible for each other's crimes. Did your neighbor steal a goose? Everyone pays. Did your uncle insult the priest's pig? You all pray harder. It's law by proximity and guilt. You hear a commotion by the stocks. A young man is being locked in for cursing during Mass. He claims he was sneezing. The priest claims he was possessed. The stocks creak as he sits red-faced and pelted with turnip peels by children whose joy is disturbingly precise. And then, of course, there's church law. The priest is both spiritual leader and local informant. He hears confessions, blesses fields, and occasionally reports suspected heresies to the bishop's scribe. Did you mutter something about not liking St. Cuthbert's new statue? You might get a firm warning. Did you do it during Lent while holding a sausage that's 3 days in penance robes and a public apology while standing in a ditch? Even saying God's bones too loudly can result in a fine. Swearing by saints' relics or theological concepts is frowned upon. You develop creative alternatives. By my grandmother's goats becomes your new catchphrase. Later in the day, you attend a manorial court session. The judge is the steward, an aging man who looks like he's halfway through transforming into a tree. He calls each case with the energy of a sleepy owl. John, son of Will, accused of grazing his sheep on the wrong side of the hedge. John shrugs. The sheep can't read, he says. The steward blinks. A fine is issued anyway. Court proceedings are more social than serious. The fines are small. The punishment's mostly public embarrassment or a stern lecture about hedgerow etiquette. You sit through a dispute about a duck, a very long accusation involving stolen manure, and one oddly dramatic trial over a missing sock. Sometimes justice turns theatrical. Trial by ordeal isn't common anymore, but your grandmother swears she saw a woman forced to carry hot iron to prove her innocence. The burn healed quickly, which apparently meant God liked her, or she had calluses. Either way, she's now the village beekeeper and walks with a limp. By sunset, your cousin's mushrooms have turned out to be completely edible. Miraculously, the soup is delicious if a bit gritty, and you enjoy it by firelight while someone plays a cracked flute. You didn't get fined, you didn't get cursed, and no one reported your tunic to the reeve. That counts as a win. So now, as the fire crackles low and the shadows stretch across the thatch beams, you settle deeper into the straw and let your limbs sink into that oddly familiar ache earned from a day of rules, dodged, mushrooms survived, and laws bent ever so gently. The village quiets. Somewhere in the distance a cartwheel creaks and the last bell tolls from the church tower like a sleepy sigh. The reeve's footsteps fade. Even the chickens seem to exhale finally still. You let the slow, earthy rhythm of medieval night wrap around you like a wool blanket. Scratchy, imperfect, but deeply, deeply human. The air is soft now. The mud outside is just a memory. The fire's glow dances across the walls in flickers of amber, and someone hums a hymn under their breath, a tune older than memory without words, just warmth. You stretch your toes. One last puff of smoke curls up the chimney. You feel the weight of the day melt into the floorboards, the worry of being fined for a squirrel stew or trampled sock drifting away like so much candle smoke. And in that stillness, you realize it wasn't glory or comfort or even safety that kept people going. It was rhythm, community, the mild absurdity of surviving another day in a world designed by bishops, beasts, and barley. And now, you've survived too. You close your eyes. The owl calls once, the thatch shifts gently in the breeze, and you drift softly, quietly, like a duck acquitted of theft. We drift quietly into the marbled hush of ancient Rome, where sunlight spills lazily across lion-footed furniture, and the scent of warmed honey clings to the air like overly ambitious incense. Outside, sandals shuffle on cobblestones and fountains mumble in Latin. But inside the imperial palace, silence. Because Emperor Nero is not awake yet. It's Tuesday, and he never rises before the sun has been properly applauded. You probably wouldn't survive this. Not because it's violent, though. Yes, sometimes it is. But because the sheer boredom of power, when combined with an unlimited supply of pomegranates and bad advice, is absolutely smothering. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up as Nero, or rather you're being woken, by a eunuch named Sporus who glides in carrying a bowl of warm milk and a face that says he's already had enough of today. You groan softly, roll over onto 5 layers of imported silk and pretend not to hear the distant sounds of petitioners arriving at the forum. That's a problem for later Nero. The chamber is dim despite the mosaic skylight shaped like a sea nymph. The ceiling creaks. Somewhere a parrot squawks the phrase, "Nero is divine" in Greek. No one remembers teaching it that, but no one dares correct it either. Eventually you sit up, stretch, yawn, gently curse the mattress for being too soft. It's made of peacock feathers after all, and your back is accustomed to firmer luxuries. You splash your face with rosewater from Alexandria, pat your cheeks with cloth soaked in Egyptian vinegar, allegedly anti-aging, and sip milk infused with crushed dates, and something called cloud honey, which may or may not just be regular honey with a fancier label. Your first activity of the day is complaining. The sandals you wore yesterday pinched, the slave who fanned you during the evening meal had too much wrist, and your dreams were absurd. You dreamed that your statue in the Forum grew legs and walked into the Senate House to demand voting rights. Everyone clapped, even the statue. Historians still argue whether this particular dream was symbolic or simply a result of fermented fig paste. As you shuffle into your morning room, because of course there's a morning room, you pass 3 busts of yourself in different moods. Stoic Nero, jovial Nero, and hungry Nero. You nod politely to each out of habit. Breakfast, that's for plebeians. You prefer a light start, a few olives hand-picked by trembling servants, a slice of melon chilled in snow hauled from the Apennines, and exactly 1 spoonful of spiced dormouse paste. The spoon is gold. The dormouse did not have a choice. You're attended by a team of advisors, astrologers, and one man whose only job is to whisper flattering updates from the provinces. Today, he informs you that someone in Gaul built a new statue of you entirely from local cheese. You nod thoughtfully. Make sure it's aged properly, you murmur, before drifting off again while someone massages your ankles with saffron oil. Around this time, someone suggests checking in on matters of state. Maybe sign a few decrees, glance at a taxation proposal. You wave them away. After tunic hour, you say, not before. The The minutes drift. You sip diluted wine from a cup shaped like a hippocampus. You glance at a scroll, pretend to read it, then sigh loudly and announce, "I am overcome with the weight of empire." This is the cue for someone to bring you a cushion, possibly two. Outside, Rome hums with the chaos of daily life, vendors shouting carts, rattling, someone loudly accusing someone else of goat theft. But in here, the day flows at a different rhythm, a kind of gentle opulence, an absurd version of slow living, the kind where you don't lift anything heavier than a date pit. You think about writing a new poem, something about thunder betrayal or how your uncle's nose resembled a turnip. But instead you recline on your couch and stare at the ceiling where tiny golden stars have been painted to glow when hit by morning light. They don't. Someone will be flogged for that, or at least strongly fanned at. By mid-morning, you are still not dressed, still not ruling, still not entirely convinced you should. But that's the beauty of being emperor on a boring Tuesday. No one can tell you that not eating breakfast for 2 hours is weird. No one will question your decision to host a one-man poetry recital to your own statue. And no one, not even your mother's ghost who still judges you in your dreams, can stop you from making today exactly as slow and peculiar as you want. Because why rush? There are still grapes to peel, poems to half write, and one truly unfortunate-looking parrot who just learned to say, "Av me." You stare at it for a moment. You wonder if it's mocking you. It probably is. Now that you've finally decided to rise hours after Rome's senators have sweated through debates, and at least one baker has been robbed by a raccoon, you shuffle toward the dressing alcove. This is not your typical wardrobe. This is an imperial wardrobe staffed by 3 grown men whose sole job is to present you with fabric options while trying not to sigh too loudly. You settle on a low marble bench, recline just so, and raise one eyebrow. This is the signal. The tunic ritual begins. Today is Tuesday, not a festival, not a triumph, not even one of those curious Saturnine half-days where you pretend to be humble. Just a plain, unadorned, unambitious Tuesday, which makes your clothing choices both simpler and somehow more agonizing. Silk. One attendant offers reverently, holding up a glimmering lavender tunic embroidered with bees. You frown. Bees are a Thursday motif. He panics, bows, retreats. The second offers a more somber garment, deep red, lined in golden thread, rumored to have once been kissed by a Vestal virgin, or maybe just spilled wine. Either way, it has drama. You're intrigued. Historians still argue whether Nero dressed extravagantly every day or just when people were watching. Some suggest he wore simple garments in private. Others believe he kept spare togas for dramatic exits from his own bathtub. The truth is probably somewhere between cult leader and swan enthusiast. Back in the alcove, you're eyeing a teal number that simply refuses to cooperate. It bunches, it gapes, it droops. A slave tries to pin it in place, but it slips like a rebellious eel. You sigh. This is why I miss Greek fashion, you mutter. Then come the sandals, rows of them, straps, laces, metal accents, small jewels that probably came from unfortunate traders. You pause at a pair with miniature lion faces on the toes, too aggressive for a Tuesday possibly. But they do say I'm approachable, but I've conquered things. You pick them, you regret nothing. Next, the accessories. Rings, brooches, and a ceremonial dagger you won't use but like to carry because it makes your waist look smaller. You select a ring with a carved onyx cameo of yourself, kept from a senator who now lives suspiciously far from Rome. You don't ask why. Perfume comes last, always last. Today's blend includes crushed violets, ambergris, myrrh, and something described only as spring essence. You have no idea what that is, but it smells expensive and vaguely divine. An attendant wafts it toward you using a feathered fan made from a flamingo who presumably had other plans. As you're finally robed, belted, and perfumed, a runner arrives with news. Not urgent news, of course, that would come with drums, but the usual. Someone defaced a statue, someone else claimed to see a goat speak Latin, and the grain shipment from Egypt is delayed because of, quote, nautical sulking. You nod solemnly. While advisors huddle to strategize, you stare at your sleeve, a wrinkle. tiny, barely visible, but it's there. You pluck at it. It resists. A tailor is summoned. 3 of them descend like hawks, smoothing, fussing, murmuring in whispers, only audible to linen. You watch them and think, this is power. Dressing for you is a ritual of identity. You're not just putting on clothes, you're wrapping yourself in symbols. Purple dyes forbidden to commoners, golden clasps shaped like Jupiter's lightning bolts, tunics that say I could be ruling. But instead, I'm contemplating whether pearls are gauche. Still, it's not all vanity. Rome expects this. The emperor must shine, shimmer, and sparkle just enough to distract from the rising bread prices. You are quite literally the distraction in chief. After the fitting, you parade briefly through your inner garden, where peacocks pretend not to fear you, and a lemon tree has mysteriously died for the 3rd time this month. You pause before a mirror polished from obsidian. Not to admire yourself well, not only, but to check the back of your head for signs of divine glow. There are none. You pretend not to be disappointed. Finally, your tutor-turned-flatterer appears. He bows too deeply and asks the question he asks every Tuesday. Would the divine wish to address the Senate today? You look at him, you look at your sandals, you look at the sky. No, you say, the divine wishes to be admired from afar today. He nods. He was hoping you'd say that. And so, draped in silks and smelling like a floral thunderstorm, you head not to the Forum, not to the Temple of Jupiter, not even to the circus, just to your private reading room where someone has arranged scrolls by color and your favorite cushion waits indented just right. There's no agenda, no decree, just you, your excessively fragrant self, and the deeply imperial pleasure of spending 90 minutes deciding whether yellow makes you look too provincial. It's not glamorous, it's not efficient, but it is Tuesday. Lunch approaches not with urgency, but with ceremony. You don't so much eat at midday as commune with your palate. Food for you is performance, even on a boring Tuesday. You arrive at the dining room not by walking, but by drifting, flanked by 2 men whose only job is to make sure your robe doesn't touch the floor. One of them may be named Felix. The other might actually be Felix, but insists on being called not Felix to avoid confusion. This is what happens when you promote people based on the beauty of their earlobes. The dining chamber is calm, lit with filtered sun through marble screens carved to resemble clouds. A small waterfall gurgles somewhere in the background. A heron sits outside the window judging you. You choose to ignore it. The couches are arranged in a gentle crescent around a low table. You recline in the center, head propped up on a citrus-scented pillow. A slave enters with a tray of peeled grapes and a look that says, "Yes, I know this is absurd, but please don't excommunicate me." Your chef, a man named Calvis, who speaks in rhymes on Thursdays, has prepared something light and musical. You're not entirely sure what that means until he unveils a dish involving baked fish, rose petals, fermented anchovy paste, and a single fig cut to resemble a swan. You nod. Acceptable. The fig is delicious. Between bites, you decide spontaneously, gloriously, tragically to recite one of your latest compositions, a poem titled Ode to a Dusty Olive Jar Found Near the Latrine. You raise your hand, musicians pause, slaves kneel, a child you don't recognize drops a tambourine. The room holds its breath. You begin. The poem is long, very long. It starts with the olive jar's silent dignity, then detours through the melancholy of broken amphorae, and ends with a brief meditation on whether spoons have souls. You weep softly. So does your uncle's second cousin, though it's hard to say if it's from emotion or pollen. Historians still debate whether Nero's poetry had literary merit or if people simply clapped to avoid exile. Certainly your audience claps now. They clap like their lives depend on it, because in a way they do. You reward them with a smile and a second fig. After poetry comes music. You don't listen to music, you participate in music. You reach for your beloved lyre, its strings freshly tuned and lightly perfumed with lavender. You strum a soft chord. It sounds like a mosquito having second thoughts. Undeterred, you begin a ballad, something about doomed love and improperly stored lentils. Your voice, trained by imperial tutors and shower acoustics, echoes through the room like a sleepy seagull. It's not technically beautiful, but it's earnest. And in Rome, earnestness from an emperor is more terrifying than any army. Once a visiting diplomat compared your singing to the gentle wail of a dolphin bidding farewell. You promoted him. Today your song ends with a long high note that causes a vase to crack slightly. Someone whispers divine resonance. You pretend not to hear. You absolutely heard. With the concert concluded, the meal continues. Calvis has returned now, offering honey-glazed dormice on rosemary skewers. You take one, politely nibble the ear, and casually ask whether anyone has written an ode to the noble turnip. No one answers. Dessert is a mountain of dates stuffed with pine nuts and regret. You eat 3, maybe 4. Who's counting? You're emperor. You invented Roman calorie amnesia. And then comes the nap. This is not just sleep. This is postprandial reverence. You retreat to your napping chamber, different from your sleeping chamber, obviously, and lie down on a chaise that has been gently warmed by the sun and a small dog. The dog is decorative. You named him Triumphus. He has his own toga. You drift into the light doze of an overfed demigod. Outside, the heron continues to stare. In your dream, you're being chased by a sentient statue of Mars who insists you owe him poetry royalties. You try to explain the nature of public domain. He doesn't listen. You wake up just in time to receive an update from a senator who's traveled 3 days to bring you news of a minor rebellion in a province whose name you can't quite remember. You nod solemnly and say, "We shall address it after theater." He bows. He was expecting that. Before you leave the chamber, you recite one final haiku. Fig brave and silent, rests where wine once dared to flow. Tuesday never ends. Someone writes it down. You pretend it was spontaneous. The sun begins to lean westward, painting the palace walls in lazy amber, which means it's time for the next sacred rite in the imperial Tuesday theater practice. You've already performed for your lunch guests, your parrot, and an extremely unresponsive fig, but none of that counts. This is the real stage, the private amphitheater inside your palace complex, built not for public adoration, though that's a nice bonus, but for personal greatness. You call it the Echoarium, because it echoes, and because no one dared suggest a better name. You arrive not in a chariot, but in a reclining litter shaped like a swan. You invented it. Possibly by accident. The swan's eyes are rubies. Its wings flap slightly when you shift. It is far too much, and yet not enough. You dismount dramatically and are greeted by your troupe, a collection of professional actors, terrified senators, lute-strumming slaves, and one elderly dancer named Melina, whose knees no longer bend but whose commitment is absolute. They applaud lightly. One claps with only his index fingers. You note this for later. Your director approaches. He's sweating, not because of the heat, but because you rewrote the script again. Overnight, twice. The play is now called The Tragedy of Buttercup, the Doomed Philosopher, and it features, among other things, a surprise monologue from a haunted turnip. Rehearsals begin. You stride onto the stage wearing a golden mask that depicts your own face, but slightly sadder. It's your tragic but wise look. There's a whole set of them in the dressing room, wistful, brooding, lightly betrayed, and deeply contemplating bread. You switch masks mid-scene dramatically, and often sometimes with no narrative reason. Your lines are long, winding, and mostly improvised. The court scribe tries to take notes but runs out of wax tablets by line 12. The chorus attempts to keep up. They do not succeed. One poor senator accidentally rhymes honor with llama. You pause. That's not even Latin, you whisper. He nods slowly, like a man accepting exile. Outside the amphitheater, Rome moves on markets, bustle, lovers, argue, chariots rattle. But here inside this little marble bubble, time has become entirely yours. You spend 10 minutes arguing with a curtain, then give a rousing speech to a potted fig tree. Melina performs a sorrowful, interpretive dance using only her elbows. Someone faints. You call it art. Historians still debate whether Nero's love of performance was genuine obsession or political theater. Some suggest he believed himself the reincarnation of Orpheus. Others think he simply enjoyed being clapped at without being stabbed. Whatever the truth, your plays are legendary, not for their quality, but for their sheer persistence. Between acts, you consult your costume assistant about a cape that's not flowing enough. You require at least 7 feet of dramatic flutter. This cape should weep when I leave a room, you declare. He bows and begins sewing. Next scene, you enter barefoot carrying a lyre and a basket of pears. This is your disguised prince moment. Everyone pretends not to know it's you. The basket tips, the pears roll. You ad-lib a lament about the fleeting nature of fruit. A guard weeps into his sandal. You take a bow. It's not the end of the play, but you feel it deserves one. Then suddenly, disaster. Someone forgets a line. You freeze. The room holds its breath. But instead of punishing them, you improvise. You become their missing line. You swirl across the stage, arms outstretched, whispering, "Where words fail, I must rise like figs on the wind." Silence. Then thunderous applause. At least from 2 terrified senators and Melina, whose clapping elbows echo like fate itself. You close rehearsal with a final act, a musical duet with your parrot, which does not go well. It squawks the wrong pitch. You squawk back. Someone declares it avant-garde. You accept this. By now the sun has dipped below the cypress trees. The echoarium glows with torchlight shadows dancing across the marbled colonnades. You remove your mask, gently, like a man stepping out of legend and into a tepid bath. Everyone bows. You thank them with a magnanimous wave. Someone faints again, possibly from relief. On your way out, you pause by the dressing mirror and murmur to your reflection. They were not ready for Buttercup. You nod. Your reflection nods back. You wink. It winks slower. And just like that, the show is over. For now, until next Tuesday. You return to your private quarters, humming the theme from Scene 3, where the haunted turnip explains fate to a lost goat. It's a strong melody. Surprisingly catchy. You make a note to have it played by the palace fountains tomorrow. Back in your robe, free from capes and metaphors, you glance at the sky. Venus twinkles faintly. You wonder if she enjoyed the performance. You decide she did. You yawn softly. You've burned off your lunch with interpretive sorrow and dramatic monologues. And tomorrow is Wednesday, which means policy meetings, senators, scribes, the real business of empire. But that's future Nero's problem. Night wraps around Rome like a sleepy cat curling into marble. The stars hang lazily over the Palatine Hill, and the last cries of market vendors fade into the warm hush of oil lamps flickering in their sconces. Somewhere a dog barks at a column for reasons known only to dogs. You ignore it. You, Emperor Nero, have entered the final chapter of your Tuesday, the hours of scented baths, anxious omens, and bronze-based self-reflection. Back in your private chamber, vast and hushed, draped with purple fabrics that cost more than entire villas, you remove your sandals and hand them wordlessly to a servant. Not Felix bows and disappears into the shadows like a curtain closing. Another attendant is already preparing your bath. Not just any bath. This one involves goat's milk rose petals, lilac oil, and a few stray gold flakes added not for health, but for morale. A musician plays a lyre softly from behind a curtain, strumming a tune you composed last year called The Lament of the Absent Tiger. You don't know why it's sad. It just is. You lower yourself into the bath with the grace of a minor god and the sigh of someone who just remembered he's been emperor since he was 16. The water is too warm, then too cold, then perfect. You stay silent about this fluctuation to preserve the illusion of serenity. For the next hour, you do absolutely nothing, and yet you are busy. Your thoughts swirl like rose petals in goat milk. You wonder, did the haunted turnip monologue drag a bit? Was the senator who clapped with his index fingers actually mocking you? Did Venus really twinkle at your final bow, or was that just a torch flickering behind a dusty window? This is the danger zone, the hour of mild emperor neurosis. Historians still argue whether Nero suffered from insomnia or whether he simply enjoyed being dramatic about his bedtime. Whatever the case, your mind is very much awake. To calm it, you summon your favorite soothsayer. She enters barefoot, holding a handful of laurel leaves and a very tired chicken. Together you gaze into a polished bronze mirror. The reflection shimmers not with magic, but with candlelight and very expensive oils. She mutters something about Jupiter's disapproval and suggests a sacrificial cake. You nod solemnly, then ask whether Mercury's mood affects your hairline. She pretends not to hear. The bath ends when your fingers wrinkle slightly, an omen you interpret as enough imperial stewing for one night. You rise. Towels descend like birds. You are dried with the care usually reserved for sacred relics. Back in your sleeping chamber, incense curls up from 3 different braziers, one for clarity, one for dreams, and one that just smells like cinnamon because you like it. The bed is massive, covered in silks, and allegedly blessed by 12 priests, possibly more. You've lost count. You slide beneath the sheets only to sit up again and call for the astrologer. He arrives in a robe the color of regret, holding a chart that resembles angry spaghetti. He begins explaining the moon's current position relative to Mars. You listen with your eyes closed. He gets to the part about Venus in retrograde, and you gently interrupt to ask whether tomorrow will be a good day for wearing sapphires. He hesitates. You narrow your eyes. He quickly nods. You dismiss him and roll onto your side. Triumphus. Your small decorative dog leaps onto the bed and spins in a circle before collapsing near your elbow. His snoring begins almost immediately. You meanwhile begin your final ritual, composing tomorrow's opening line. Maybe a lament, a prophecy, a whimsical observation about figs. You whisper to the ceiling. Wednesday, the cruel sequel to Tuesday's forgotten lullaby. Yes, that's the one. You close your eyes. Outside, Rome glows faintly under the stars. The Colosseum hasn't been built yet. The Forum slumbers under its own echoes. And somewhere in a quiet corner of the palace, the parrot mutters, Ave me. You smile, just a little. Your empire will spin on. The senators will bicker. The poets will flatter. The tunics will wrinkle, and the statues will judge. But tonight, on this quiet, boring Tuesday, you ruled not through decree or sword, but through sheer ornamental persistence. And that perhaps is the truest form of power. And now, as the sounds of the palace fade into gentle night and the oil lamps burn low behind their curtains, you find yourself resting not as an emperor, not as a performer or philosopher or poetic menace to Rome, but as a man wrapped in silk and silence, drifting toward dreams. Your body, heavy with roses and ritual, sinks into the mattress like a stone sinking into warm olive oil. Even your thoughts slow, stretched out into ribbons of half-finished songs and vague memories of plays where vegetables had emotional arcs. The tension of sandals and tunics and performance slips away, replaced by the soft hush of linen and the quiet snore of a loyal dog. Outside, the breeze whispers through the columns. The city sighs, and the sky ever patient drapes itself in stars. You did nothing extraordinary today, and that was the point. You lived a Tuesday, the way only emperors can, slowly, indulgently, and with just enough lyre solos to make it feel justified. So rest now. Let your breath slow, your limbs still, your mind drift. Forget the turnips, forget the figs, forget the senator who tried to rhyme honor with llama. Just listen to the silence of ancient marble, the softness of a half-remembered poem, the peace of a Rome that sleeps. And as your dreams unfold, strange scented soft, you might find yourself waking in another Tuesday with sandals waiting and a mirror that still says, "You are enough." Good night, Emperor. We drift quietly into the dust-swirled courtyards of ancient Persia, back to a time when empires stretched like shadows across the sand, when gold-roofed halls shimmered under the desert sun, and when your biggest worry might just be whether you remembered your ink brush. The palace of Persepolis looms nearby, its columns rising like stone stalks into the sky. Lions carved into staircases stare you down. You try not to blink first. You are a low-ranking scribe in service to someone who reports to someone who once brushed shoulders with someone important. In short, you're not nobody, but you're not getting your name etched in any tablets either. You've got just enough status to be invited to the meetings and just enough anxiety to never speak at them. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your day begins at dawn, which for some reason always involves a rooster 2 buildings over, screaming like it owes you money. You rise from your woven mat stretch until something pops and slap the dust from your tunic. Today, you tell yourself, will be thrilling. Perhaps you'll witness a tax form being corrected, or maybe you'll be trusted to carry the ink box. The walk to the palace complex takes 20 minutes, 30 if you stop to inspect the absurdly precise symmetry of the paving stones. You always do. It's a coping mechanism. The streets of Persepolis are already murmuring, merchants arranging jars, soldiers yawning into their helmets, a camel sneezing an existential protest. By the time you reach the scribal wing, the sun has turned the stone walls a sleepy gold. You nod to the other scribes. They nod back with the enthusiasm of dry clay. Your station is a small desk made of cedar, probably once part of a boat or a very unlucky temple door. Upon it, a stylus, a wax tablet, and a tiny dish of fig paste. You try not to dip your stylus into the fig paste again. Last time the inscription read, "By order of the king all goats must taste delicious." You settle into the slowest part of the day, transcribing grain inventories from the northern provinces. Line by line, sack by sack, the numbers are hypnotic and not in a good way. You begin to wonder whether barley has emotions, then you begin to wonder if you do. Historians still argue whether Persian scribes had much creative freedom or if their entire lives were spent recording shipments of lentils. Some scrolls feature elaborate doodles in the margins, swirls birds. Even one very bored-looking lion, which could suggest either a playful spirit or a total breakdown in discipline. Today's scroll contains a footnote written in a different hand. 4 camels missing, possibly drunk. You blink. You reread. You copy it word for word. It's not your job to question camel motives. Mid-morning brings a burst of action. A royal courier bursts in with a tablet sealed in green wax green, the color reserved for garden matters and minor scandals. You're tasked with reading it aloud. You clear your throat and declare, "To the keeper of trees, please relocate the fig saplings from the western terrace. They are too judgmental." No one laughs. You nod solemnly. Trees are known to carry grudges. By now the sun is climbing. The wax on your tablet softens slightly, making every stroke a gamble. You pause to stretch, and someone asks if you'd like to assist in documenting a census of the royal pigeon loft. You agree, far too eagerly. The pigeon chamber is unsurprisingly loud. Feathers drift through the air like weird snow. You're handed a stylus and told to count. The pigeons do not cooperate. One pecks your sandal, another refuses to identify its district. You try your best. Gray pigeon possibly named Cyrus. Mood aggressive. Back at your desk, you're rewarded with half a date and a lukewarm cup of barley tea. The tea tastes like wet straw and disappointment, but you sip it like a king. Why? Because for one glorious hour you were pigeon adjacent. You begin composing a poem in your head. Nothing too bold, just something about how life is a scroll that occasionally smudges. You'll never write it down, but it makes the barley math feel a little less eternal. As midday approaches, your supervisor arrives and glances over your shoulder. He grunts approvingly, then corrects your spelling of emmer wheat. You nod as if this is the most important thing anyone has ever said to you. You file the morning's tablets into the archive wall, one by one, each slot labeled with a neat symbol: Fish Mountain Star, Bundle of Reeds. Yours goes under Bundle of Reeds. You tell yourself that's poetic. And then finally, mercifully, the bell rings. Not a literal bell, of course, just a guard shouting lunch and waving a stick. You rise slowly. You've earned your lentils. You step out into the courtyard where the sun now pours like hot syrup over everything. The stones are just warm enough to make your sandals sweat a little. You contemplate removing them, but then remember the last time you did and how a pebble the size of a chickpea somehow brought you to tears. The lunch hour in Persepolis is neither rushed nor particularly exciting. It's simply observed like a tax or a solar eclipse. You follow the slow trickle of other workers down a side alley that leads to the food stalls just outside the palace perimeter. They're technically not allowed to sell food this close to a royal structure, but they make up for it by not telling anyone what's actually in their soup. You queue behind a bearded man in a wool tunic who smells like onions and destiny. Ahead of him, a median goat merchant loudly negotiates the price of a date tart, while a camel tied nearby eats someone's hat. You don't intervene. The hat deserved it. When your turn comes, you ask for the usual, which is a flatbread that's sort of like a pancake and sort of like regret stuffed with lentils, scallions, and exactly 2 pomegranate seeds. It costs 3 pebbles and a sigh. You pay. You find a shady spot beneath a cypress tree where the stone wall makes a decent backrest, and the fig tree behind you seems relatively non-judgmental. You begin eating, slowly, reverently. The bread flakes just enough to make a mess, but not enough to apologize for it. Beside you, the goat merchant sits with his pack slung over one shoulder. He offers you a dried apricot in exchange for half your bread. You accept because it's hot. The air smells like grilled onions, and honestly, you'd trade your sandals for an apricot right now. As you chew, the merchant begins talking. You didn't ask him to. That's not how this works. Back home, he says, gesturing vaguely north, we don't trust the pomegranates. Too red, too round. Makes you wonder what they're hiding. You nod thoughtfully, as if this is a common agricultural concern. He continues tales of goats who can predict sandstorms, of grandmothers who can read omens in chickpea stew, and of a cousin who once wrestled a peacock for a date tart and lost. You try not to imagine the logistics. You ask him about the latest palace gossip and he leans in conspiratorially. Word is, he whispers the king's new chariot only turns left. You don't even blink. That sounds exactly right. Historians still argue whether informal lunchtime chatter in ancient Persia played any real political role, or if everyone was just pretending to be informed so their food tasted better. Several scholars believe that date tart diplomacy may have swayed minor court appointments. Others maintain it was just a way to pass the time until the sun moved 2 fingers westward. You finish your apricot and attempt to rise, but the goat merchant has more to say. Did you hear about the satrap who banned shadows? You haven't. You regret asking. He explains that during a particularly hot summer, a regional governor decided that all shadows were signs of laziness and ordered citizens to stand only in direct sunlight. The people revolted by inventing umbrellas. The satrap was reassigned to carrot logistics. You excuse yourself politely and begin wandering the bazaar, which is always just a few stalls away from complete chaos. You pass a spice seller arguing with a weaver about cinnamon accuracy. A potter selling cracked cups insists they're emotionally distressed. A man juggling chickens asks if you've seen his wife. You haven't. You also wonder if the chickens count. You pause at a stand selling carved stamps. Tiny clay seals with animals, stars, or vague geometric designs. You consider buying one shaped like a suspicious-looking squirrel. You do not, but the squirrel haunts you. A gong sounds somewhere in the distance. Not a large gong, just loud enough to say, lunch is over, return to your bureaucracy. You return. Back in the palace, your tunic slightly dustier and your sandals slightly less enthusiastic, you pass the royal gardens. The scent of myrtle and rosewater makes the afternoon seem momentarily elegant. For about 12 seconds, you feel like someone whose name might be remembered. Then a bee flies into your sleeve. You do not feel majestic anymore. Inside the Hall of Records, the supervisor is waiting. He asks if you've seen the barley reports from Susa. You haven't. He sighs with the weight of 7 scrolls and assigns you to the Bureau of Weights for the afternoon. This is not a punishment. This is simply life. But before you go, you take one last look at the pomegranate tree by the outer wall. Still too red. Still too round. Still hiding something. You arrive at the Bureau of Weights exactly 6 minutes after the hour. Not late, just marginally unhurried. The clerk at the front desk raises a brow, but says nothing. His tunic is immaculately pressed and smells faintly of dried mint and absolute authority. You step inside the chamber. It is not a thrilling room. It is in fact the exact opposite of thrilling. This is a space where dreams go to be measured in half-cubit increments and then filed alphabetically. The walls are lined with wooden shelves stacked with labeled jars, bowls, bricks, and one mysterious basket that hasn't been opened since the reign of Darius. No one dares ask why. Your task to verify and reweigh exactly 117 barley measures sent from a storage depot 3 provinces east. You are handed a ledger the size of a pillow and a set of balancing scales so finely calibrated that even your breath makes the pointer twitch. The clerk warns you not to sign near it. You nod solemnly. And so begins the quiet, grainy ballet. You scoop, you weigh, you note. You scoop again. Occasionally, a barley kernel will rebelliously fall to the floor, and you must decide whether to ignore it or chase it with ceremonial urgency. You always choose urgency. It makes you feel alive. Historians still argue whether Persian record-keeping was genuinely this meticulous or simply exaggerated by later bureaucrats trying to justify their careers. Some believe the Persians invented bureaucracy as a form of spiritual endurance training. Others claim it was just an elaborate excuse to collect more clay tablets. Regardless, you are now 3 measures deep and already contemplating the meaning of volume, not philosophically, just literally. You wonder if one of these barley sacks is gaslighting the rest. You casually test it again. It's fine, probably. The man next to you is humming an ancient lullaby about millet taxes. You hum along out of solidarity. Somewhere around the 43rd measure, you take a brief break to stretch your fingers. This involves awkwardly waving your hands in slow circles while making tiny grunting noises. No one comments. They are doing it too. Your supervisor pops in briefly to check your work and leaves behind a slice of dried apple as a token of encouragement. It tastes like admiration and cardboard. You savor every chew. On the 72nd measure, things get exciting. One of the scales tips ever so slightly in the wrong direction, not by much, just enough to suggest treachery. You remeasure, same result. You alert the clerk. He arrives, adjusts his belt, peers at the barley like it owes him an apology, and declares, "This measure is off by 2 kernels." You blink. He nods. Together you remove exactly 2 kernels. Balance is restored. The empire endures. The afternoon sun begins its slow tilt through the window slats, casting long diagonal shadows across your table. It makes the barley glisten in a way that almost feels poetic. Almost. You pause for a sip of your barley water. Yes, even your beverages are themed. As the pace settles into a rhythm, your mind drifts. You remember the goat merchant and his conspiracy theories. You wonder if there truly is a satrap who fears shadows. You recall the suspicious squirrel stamp and regret not purchasing it. You vow quietly to return tomorrow. By the 93rd measure, the clerk begins telling a story. It's about a nobleman who once tried to bribe a grain inspector with a basket of sweet dates and a particularly flattering poem. The inspector took the poem, rejected the dates, and added 3 extra taxes to the nobleman's next shipment. Moral of the story: never underestimate a man who owns 6 different weighing stones. You finish the last measure just as the light shifts golden orange. The clerk places a wax seal at the bottom of your ledger, marking it with the official insignia of the Bureau, a barley sheaf flanked by 2 very bored lions. You have now completed your task. To celebrate, the clerk invites you to join the weight balance ritual. This is not as spiritual as it sounds. It involves placing the smallest stone, called the whisper weight, on the scale and watching as everyone holds their breath to see if it moves. It never does, but the silence is very soothing. You exit the bureau with barley dust on your sleeves and the quiet pride of a person who has helped the empire not collapse today. The guards nod as you pass. You nod back just a touch more dramatically than necessary. In the corridor, you overhear two junior scribes arguing about whether the new ink recipe is too runny or just enthusiastic. You resist the urge to join the debate. You are above that now. You have weighed things. You step into the main hall just as a breeze floats in through an open window. It carries the scent of jasmine dust, and maybe a hint of roasted chickpeas. You pause at the window, look out at the hills beyond the palace walls. They're bathed in gold. Somewhere out there, a caravan moves slowly across the road, its camels trailing dust and ambition. And you return to your desk a little straighter than before and sit once more. The empire may be vast, but today you measured its barley. The sun is beginning its gentle descent behind the Zagros Mountains, casting everything in the palace in that almost magical hue of dusty amber and elongated shadows. You rise from your desk like a carefully unrolled scroll and make your way toward the fire temple. It's not required. No one orders you to attend the evening rituals unless you're in the priesthood or have very nosy neighbors, but the soft hush of it, the slow-burning embers and the faint smell of sandalwood have a way of easing the mind after a day of counting grains. The temple isn't far, just a few turns through colonnaded walkways and past the hallway where two royal cats famously had a stare-down that lasted 12 days. No one interrupts that hallway anymore. As you approach, you hear the soft murmurs of prayer. A small group of white-robed attendants are already gathered around the central flame, which burns in an elevated bronze basin, carved with scenes of mythical winged bulls and possibly a duck. It's hard to say. The duck seems angry. You remove your sandals, step quietly into the chamber, and join the others at a respectful distance. The fire crackles not loudly, but in that polite way sacred flames tend to do. The air is thick with incense. You can almost taste the myrrh. The magi leading the service chant something melodic in Old Persian. You don't understand every word, but the rhythm lulls you. The flickering light plays on everyone's faces, turning even the grumpiest of court officials into dreamy silhouettes. You bow your head, not necessarily out of deep spiritual conviction, but because it feels right, and also because if you tilt your head just so the warmth of the fire hits that spot on the back of your neck that's been tense since lunch. Historians still argue whether the Zoroastrian fire rituals were solemn spiritual events or carefully choreographed performances of stability. Some believe the flames were symbolic of inner purity. Others suggest they were just a very persuasive way to keep people from knocking over sacred objects. One theory, whispered only by the most speculative of scholars, claims that at least one temple was run by a priest who lit incense solely to cover up the smell of his goat. Your attention drifts. To your left, a woman quietly places a clay tablet on the altar, likely a prayer or request for favor. To your right, an old man seems to be whispering to the fire itself. You wonder if the fire answers back. You decide not to ask. You're given a moment to place your own offering, just a pinch of powdered frankincense in a tiny bowl. It smolders softly like your patience during afternoon barley audits. You close your eyes, and then you hear it. A soft snore. You glance sideways. One of the attendants has absolutely dozed off mid-prayer, chin on chest robe, gently rising and falling. No one wakes him. It's not disrespectful. It's just the fire doing its job. After the final chant, the Magi rings a small bell made of copper and fish-shaped metalwork. Everyone bows and begins to disperse sandals, whispering against stone. You step out into the early night air. Cool now, with a breeze that smells faintly of citrus and ceremonial ash. You make your way to the royal kitchens, not for a meal, but for what might be the most curious part of your day, the smelling of the stews. Yes, it's a real thing. Each evening, the head cook lines up 3 clay pots along the outer wall and invites passers-by to guess the ingredients. It's a game, a test, a chance for the elite to pretend they know things about cumin. Tonight's stews are especially pungent. You lean over the first pot and inhale notes of lamb apricot vinegar and maybe something nutty. You guess goat with indecision. The cook chuckles and tells you it's actually pomegranate lamb with overcooked chickpeas. You weren't far off. You don't eat the stew as reserved for the royal table, but the smells alone are oddly comforting, especially the third one, which smells exactly like the inside of your grandmother's cloak. You don't ask questions. You continue walking now past the garden terraces where water channels gurgle politely and citrus trees nod sleepily. A gardener is trimming a bush into the shape of a lion playing a lyre. You think about asking why, but the man looks focused and also like someone who talks exclusively in riddles. The stars are out now. First a few. Then a quiet shimmer across the whole sky. You find a small bench near the edge of the courtyard and sit. From here, you can see almost everything the gardens. The fire temple's last glow. Even the Bureau of Weights now locked and still. The city breathes in slow pulses. You're joined by a cat. Possibly royal. Possibly not. Doesn't matter. It sits beside you and stares into the distance as if pondering the mysteries of taxation. You imitate its posture. The two of you look very wise. Your thoughts drift toward home, wherever that is now, toward the goat merchant and his pomegranate suspicions, toward the idea of doing this all again tomorrow. And it doesn't feel terrible, which in ancient Persia might be the closest thing to enlightenment. By now, the palace grounds have slipped into that soft, sleepy rhythm only great empires can afford. Torchlight flickers lazily in sconces. Somewhere a lute is plucking out a melody so slow it feels like it might fall asleep mid-note. You rise from your bench and take one last stroll out past the fountains toward the royal orchard. This, you've heard, is where whispers come to nap. The orchard is vast, bordered by neat stone walkways, and guarded by citrus trees that seem just a little too smug about their symmetry. Rows of pomegranate, fig, almond, and apricot trees stand in a sort of sleepy formation like soldiers who've been told they'll be inspected, but probably not tonight. You pass a gardener tending to a gooseberry bush. He nods. You nod. Neither of you speaks because at this hour words feel like unnecessary guests at a very small dinner party. You find your favorite tree, a short, squat fig that leans slightly to the left like it's always on the verge of telling you something scandalous. You sit beneath it. Here's where the whispers start. Not loud, just fragments. Bits of dream-wrapped conversation from the other orchard visitors. A pair of court musicians quietly debating whether lyres or harps are more romantic. A young palace assistant swearing they saw the king trip on his own robe. Someone else half asleep muttering about a peach with a grudge. The night air is gentle now, almost damp. The kind of cool that makes you instinctively pull your tunic tighter and wonder why cloaks are never as dramatic in real life as they are in murals. Above, the moon peeks through a lattice of almond branches. You're not sure what phase it's in, but it's doing its job, casting silver across the stone paths and making everything look just slightly more important than it probably is. Nearby, a few of the royal gardeners gather near a stone bench and begin their usual evening ritual, recounting what they swear were secret conversations overheard among the royal plants. You don't interrupt, you just listen. "Did you hear what the fig tree said today?" one of them whispers. "Something about the treasury clerk's sandals, said they were unnecessarily loud." There are chuckles. Someone adds, "The apricot tree claims it saw a noblewoman sneak a goose into the bathhouse." Historians still argue whether these gardener rituals were mere jokes, a form of low-stakes political commentary, or subtle reminders that even the trees were paying attention. Some suggest the orchard served as an informal meeting ground for gossip too delicate for the court. Others believe it was simply the most peaceful place to pretend to work. Tonight, the conversation drifts toward dreams. One gardener claims the olive trees predict weather. Another insists the lemons judge people silently. You nod to yourself. The lemons definitely do. A fig drops from the tree above you with a quiet plop. You pick it up, feel its soft skin, and consider whether it's a gift or an accusation. You decide it's both and take a bite. Sweet, earthy, slightly overripe, just like most bureaucracies. You lie back, staring up into the layered branches above. Someone begins humming a lullaby about a hero who fell asleep during battle and accidentally won by rolling downhill into the enemy. You're fairly certain it's not historically accurate, but it's catchy. A soft wind brushes through the orchard, shaking loose a few blossoms that drift down like confetti from a very tired celebration. You wonder briefly how many empires have risen and fallen while someone somewhere stared at a tree and decided not to go back inside just yet. You begin to doze. The last thing you hear is one of the gardeners asking if anyone's seen the emperor's missing cat. The answer, of course, is no. But you're not sure the cat was ever missing, just elsewhere. The orchard fades behind you now, the whispers dimming like candles at the end of a banquet. The fig tree leans a little further, as if to tuck you in. The soft breath of the night breeze follows you as you float backward through the corridors of the palace, past the pigeon chamber, past the echo of barley measures, past the silent scales and the murmuring fire. You find yourself back at your simple bedroll, tucked into a quiet corner near the scribe's quarters. Your sandals rest neatly beside it. Someone, maybe you, maybe not, has folded your tunic with a kind of sleepy precision. Everything is slower now, softer. Even the air seems padded like a woolen blanket, too old to be decorative, but too beloved to be replaced. You lie down, eyes half closed, thoughts fluttering like moths against the oil lamp's glow. A cat curls nearby, probably royal, probably not. And as your breathing deepens, you remember one final thing today you mattered. Maybe just to a handful of barley sacks, maybe just to one goat merchant who thought you listened well. Or maybe just to the fig tree. But in a place so vast, so ancient, where stories drift like smoke and nothing is written without intention, being a quiet part of it all is enough. So let it all slip away now. The scrolls, the incense, the dusty jokes. Let the empire manage itself for a while. You've done more than enough. Sleep well.